Previously on Vintage HLC Show and Tell, we looked at several lines made at Homer Laughlin and other potteries for Quaker Oats, including Barbara Jane, which was marketed as ivory color, trellis, and Tudor rose, which was based on the Wells shape. Today we're going to look at two more, Ravenna and Chelsea. So the first pieces of Ravenna were modeled in August of 1931. Heavily embossed shape on the rim. You see the double roses, scalloped edge, and fluted verge. Not a terribly large assortment to Ravenna, especially when compared to something like Wells or Century. So they selected 5 pieces from Ravenna, the teacup, the saucer, the 7-inch plate, the fruit cup, and the oatmeal, to be sold as premiums for Quaker Oats. And this is the decal that was selected. So it's just a floral bouquet with the rose and the tulip, mums, morning glories, and other flowers. Simple marking of Ravenna. Let's see if we can get a better one. There we go. So that's your Quaker Oats pattern. If you find pieces marked Ravenna with any other pattern, those were not for Quaker Oats. Those were pieces that were just mixed in with Ravenna sets. It's very similar to what we saw with trellis and Tudor rose. So for example, this colorful poppy decal, which we know was used on dinnerware sets and not breakfast sets because we see it on the sauce boat. This is from 1932, by the way. This has a Ravenna back stamp. But since it doesn't have the right decal, it was not meant for Quaker Oats. It was just mixed in with dinnerware sets. This was done with a lot of the overrun and quality seconds that were for Quaker Oats, so they make their way onto dinnerware sets. Again, just like what we saw with trellis and Tudor rose. Most of the decals for the dinnerware sets are borrowed from other lines. There's Meadow Goldenrod, which came from Wells. The Hollyhocks come from Wells. This tulip decal comes from Orleans. This stylized decal comes from Orleans as well as Wells. It was also used on Virginia Rose. Most of these pieces are going to be marked 32. This one has its treatment number RV1243. The Hollyhocks is treatment number RV33. Cottage decal with green verge line, RV3 from 1932. Taylor Smith & Taylor shared in production of the pieces for Quaker Oats. And it's interesting when you see pieces that are marked Ravenna that are not the Quaker Oats decals, and you see the Homer Laughlin decals. For example, this one was used on Wells. This one was used on several shapes. Century, Virginia Rose, I believe is also used on Wells, and the Knoll shape as well. Then you have this one, which is not a Homer Laughlin decal. This is a Taylor Smith & Taylor treatment. And it was their, if you know their catalog treatment numbers, this is number 51. So how do you tell a TS&T piece from a Homer Laughlin piece if you don't know what the decals are? I think the best way is to look for the underline, and I use the word think because I don't know for sure, because I've not seen enough pieces of Ravenna to say with absolute certainty. But from what I've seen, if you see that underline, then you're dealing with a piece of Taylor Smith & Taylor. If there's no underline, then you're dealing with Homer Laughlin. So if we come over to these pieces that were made for Quaker Oats, an underline, probably TS&T. No underline, probably Homer Laughlin. An underline, Taylor Smith & Taylor. And no underline, Homer Laughlin. So one final thing about Ravenna. I have a copy of a letter which helps clear up when this line was actually made and when it was discontinued. This is dated November 12, 1938. By J.D. Thompson. He was responding to a customer request. And it says, "We received your letter of November 8th in which you ask if matchings are available in pattern RV7833. This, of course, is the old Ravenna shape, which was discontinued 3 years ago. He goes on to say that he can give him the equivalent in the Orleans shape. So 3 years ago in 1938 is 1935. If this shape was introduced in 32, discontinued in 35, then we're talking about a 3-year run, which is pretty small for a Homer Laughlin shape. So that's Ravenna. The next one to look at is Chelsea, which was introduced soon after Ravenna. This is based on a Taylor Swift and Taylor shape called Marvel. So what happened in 1933? Well, January of 1933, Homer Laughlin had the Virginia Rose shape. They had just introduced it, and they sent samples to Quaker Oats, and Quaker Oats responded rather positively towards it, and they were going to go forward with a breakfast set. That is, the small serving pieces, or the small pieces, the teacup, the saucer, the oatmeal, the fruit cup, and the 7-inch plate. Well, in February 33, they changed their mind and decided to go with TS&T's Marvel. Initially, they were going to call this Garland. And here's a photocopy of some sketches of back stamps that were proposed. But then it was realized that Taylor Swift and Taylor already had a shape called Garland. So the art department scraps these. And instead, the line is named Chelsea. And this is the pattern that was selected for Quaker Oats. This decal that goes around the edge. Chelsea, or Marvel if you want to call it that, is a scallop shape with periodic embossing. A similar concept of Virginia Rose, though the embossing is much more detailed. And just like what we saw in Ravenna, there were dinnerware pieces made. So initially Homer Laughlin makes the 5 pieces for the breakfast sets, but then they've got all this overrun. They want to make dinnerware sets as well. So TS&T says it's okay to make the 9-inch plate, a platter, and a baker. So here's a platter. There's the 9-inch plate and an oval baker. There was also a nappy modeled, but I've never seen a nappy. I've only seen the bakers. So by having these extra pieces, Homer Laughlin could now take the overruns and quality seconds and have dinnerware sets as well. So you're going to see a very similar situation where you have pieces that are marked Chelsea that are not part of the Quaker Oats sets. This is a perfect example, this Red Beauty or Clematis, used on a lot of Homer Laughlin wear in the 1930s. This is Springtime, which was used on the Empress shape for Butler Brothers, but it makes its way onto this piece of Chelsea. That's even marked qualities, or second selection. So we need to look for an imperfection. You see all the little brown dots under the glaze. So they didn't use this for Quaker Oats. Instead it gets this decal. Same with this little fruit cup. It's marked Chelsea, but you see all the little spots on the bottom. Little glaze pops. Again, Chelsea 7-inch plate, and you can see the glaze pops on the bottom. So these pieces that they couldn't use for Quaker Oats, they just give them different decals and mix them in with dinnerware sets. Just like Ravenna, we have a lot of borrowed treatments. Flight of the Swallows, which comes from the well shape. Got a tulip decals in the back, which come from Newland Trellis. This one was used on, I think, Virginia Rose. This is CH31. The oval baker we looked at a moment ago has a treatment number. It is CH7. This treatment was also used on the Century shape. And most of these pieces are going to be marked 1933. Those pieces that aren't marked Chelsea but have the generic Homer Laughlin back stamp, 1933. So that's a little bit about Chelsea. Taylor Swift and Taylor's Marvel shape is much more extensive than Homer Laughlin's version. So I think that's going to do it. Chelsea and Ravenna for Quaker Oats.